has been called by the members of the staff and student representatives to the joint negotiating party in order to report to the meeting and take further briefing and measure the response of the school community to their reports. I'd like to repeat something as an opening remarks that I'm sure all of you are very aware of, but it does no harm to remind ourselves of at this time, which is the origins of the association and the School of Architecture. We've been having meetings like this now for 143 years, which gives us a fair track record of groups of people meeting together in hot or cold rooms to have sweaty conversations. The origin of this type of meeting is the meeting in 1847 of a group of students and practitioners who were interested in architectural education but weren't interested in the formality of the university system or of the articles system which was prevalent at the time in architectural education. And this, although it is now deep in folklore and legend of the association, must be remembered as its origins, that it is its purpose and its whole reason for being is that it is about architectural education, it's about the meeting of practitioners and students and teachers from the profession and from other areas who get together in order to conduct their business based on academic life. And to quote from the charter of the association, in order to promote architecture and the better understanding of architecture through the various means at its disposal, lectures, seminars, workshops, exhibitions, publications, and so forth. Over this 143 years, the way that we govern ourselves has evolved, sometimes because of outside influences. The greatest of those outside influences occurred, I think, in the 20s or a long time ago, when we sought charitable status. The effect of achieving charitable status makes us subject to the rules and the statutes of the Charities Act, the main of which is the specification of who and who may not be a part of the governing body. The situation currently under that Act and as a part of the regulations under which the Council is elected is that all members of the school community and all members of the association each have a vote in the election of the officers and the members of the Council of the association. But employed people in the association are not permitted or disbarred from membership of the Council, disbarred from membership of the ruling body. Therefore, students and all the members of the association can become part of the council, but staff members, whether they're teaching staff, administrative staff, technical staff, even a consultant who receives a fee for coming in for doing half a day's lecture, all these people are disbarred by the Charities Act from membership of the council. We therefore have to return to the origins in order to know what the ground rules are, whether they are or not incorporated in the method of working. The ground rules remain a part of our historical base. And the ground rule, which is relevant to today's meeting, is that any decisions which are taken which affect the life of a group of people, that those people should participate actively in determining the result and the questions which are to be put to them. And that is an essential part of the origin of the AA and to some extent what gives rise to us being here today. The result of this meeting, not this meeting, this coming together of students, practitioners and so on, gives rise to the definition of what is the school community. It is those people who are involved in that process. With the agenda for this meeting, you'll find a note attached. The first item on that note actually defines the membership of the school community, and that is all students currently registered in the school, teaching staffs who either have a contract of employment or a consultancy contract with the school, all administrative and technical staff who are employed by the association, and the current officers and members of the AA Council. And this brings me to the first part of this preliminary business, which is that this, therefore, is a meeting of the school community. Those people that I have just mentioned have the right and the duty to be here and to participate. But I am well aware that, as ever, there are other people who are very interested in our proceedings who are also present here today. I would remind all of you and all of them that this is actually a private meeting of a group of people who want to express their views without any outside influences. And I must therefore put to the meeting two requests for your guidance. These concern people who are present here and who are non-members of the school community. The first people that I must refer to, although they're friends of ours, I'm sure, are members of the press who are present here today. And I would like to know if it's your wish that I ask the members of the press, who no doubt are here to report this meeting, if I should ask the members of the press to leave, or if we would prefer that they stayed and reported this meeting. If I could have a show of hands, please, or whether I should ask members of the press to leave. Could you raise your hands? The members of the press should be asked to leave. Have you all finished putting hands up who are putting hands up? I see 21 hands. Those who are in favour of the members of the press staying at the meeting in order to report it, please raise their hands. Do you want to count? I think that members of the press are friends. Are very welcome to stay. The second question along that line that I must ask you is, I suppose, after that decision, are those people who are present, who are non-members of the school community, automatically, I must remind them, are not entitled to vote in any proposition which is put to the meeting. But is it your wish that they should be allowed to speak on any subject which we may be discussing? Could I have a show of hands for those who would agree that non-members should be allowed to speak in our discussions? Do you raise your hands, please? You want to count? Could David, could I ask you to act as a teller for the back of the room? Could you count from the second column there to the back and tell Edward the numbers? And Vicky, could you count the hands in that area there? Well, don't keep them moving around. Counted 4 times. And those who would prefer that the non-members are not allowed to speak, would you raise your hands, please? Well, since you counted the first, 3, 6.
Keep them up, please.
I won't on these 2 occasions count abstentions because I just think it prolongs the time taken in the meeting. But on any votes on motions which are vital to the outcome of the meeting, I will count abstentions as well as those for and against the propositions.
118 in favour.
Yes, can you keep the record? Yes, there are 118 in favour and 17 against allowing non-members to speak, so non-members are very welcome to address the meeting as appropriate. The agenda for the meeting, I hope you all have copies of. There are spare copies floating around if anybody doesn't have a copy. I'm sure they can be made available to you. The agenda has been arranged in order to leave the discussion part of the meeting as open as possible. We'll be preceded by a statement from the President of the Association, Michael Foster, here. Michael has agreed to make this statement to you this afternoon. He has also agreed that he will answer any questions of factual reporting which may be unclear from the statement he makes, but has asked to be excused participation in any discussion on his statement at this time. This is then followed by reports from both the staff and student members of the working group, and any questions on those reports can follow those. Then the remainder of the meeting has been intentionally left without formal propositions being put on the agenda. This was agreed as being the best method of proceeding in order to avoid any predefinition of what the meeting may wish to discuss and any resolutions that may be wished to be put. I would ask, if we do come to a situation where resolutions are put, that whoever might be the proposer takes great care over the wording and allows the possibility of comment and suggestion of the way the wording may be suitably altered in order to clarify the meaning of the proposition being put. I will also accept amendments to propositions. Amendments are contrary to the proposition itself, where the basic intention of the proposition is altered in some material way, and we'll discuss that type of subtlety when we get to it. You may also add riders onto propositions, which is to take the proposition and then add further requirements which eventually become part of the resolution to be voted upon. And at each stage we will vote. There are very few rules governing the conduct of school community meetings. There's no need today to discuss whether a quorum is present or not. If I recall correctly, a quorum is 35 members. But it's, I think, 12 years since the constitution of the school community was last published, and my memory is not that good. The voting is by a straightforward majority on a show of hands. There are areas within the constitution of the school community where proportions other than a straightforward majority are required, but none of those are subject to today's discussions as far as I'm aware. I would ask that anybody speaking first announces themselves. We all, like me, tend to think that everybody knows who we are. But like me, I recognise many faces but don't have a clue what your names are or what part of the school you might represent. So if, at the moment when you start speaking, you would kindly announce who you are and what part of the school you come from, we'd all be very grateful. The last thing I might mention is that a record is being made of this meeting. We're keeping a videotape of the meeting, so anybody who wishes to refer to any part of the discussion later has that as reference. Apart from that, any resolutions which are passed by the meeting will also be recorded, and you'll have a written document distributed in due course which record the actual resolutions and so forth of the meeting. But that will be a straightforward record of any decisions which may be taken. I hope that's all clear. Sorry to have taken the time to go through it, but I think it's important that we understand the ground rules and the background. If I could move on to the first matter of business and ask Michael Foster to speak to you as the President of the Association. Michael.
I'm here to make this statement on behalf of all council members, and I'm their spokesman in this respect. I'd just like to start by saying why council are not here today, the reason being that this meeting as you've been told already, was called by the staff and student members of the Joint Advisory Working Group. There are three constituents of the Joint Advisory Working Group: staff, students and council. Council weren't consulted in this respect. The meeting was called without their knowledge, and they were shown a draft agenda earlier this week and felt that it was inappropriate for them to come to a meeting which at that time had certain premeditated motions on it. So council felt that it was correct that in fact one of us, in this case me, should come and make this statement, but they should not be party to the meeting. We are, however, very aware that you do want to hear from us. And as Dennis has said, this statement can be questioned afterwards on facts, but I do not wish to get into a debate or argument on matters which are not fact. We wish to put the record straight if it needs to be put straight, and I would also emphasize that the view I'm putting forward is the unanimous view of all 18 members of Council. If you would bear with me, there are two elements of this statement that I wish to make. The first is a background, and the second is the current situation. So I'll start with the background. Firstly, who are Council? Council are professional people who are committed to the health and future of the AA, and any difficulties they may have had with working with the chairman, if you've been told that, are certainly more than overridden by their interest in the AA itself. The majority of them were educated here. Many of them have taught here, and I come into both those first two categories. Some are personal friends of the chairman, and some have even been asked to stand for council by Alvin himself. We're unpaid governors of the school, and we are ultimately responsible for the running of the school under the laws of the Charity Commission. We cannot, and we do not wish to become executive controllers of the school, i.e. to run the academic or cultural side. That is something that I want to firmly put in its place. Council has no interest in that. Council is voluntary. Council has the interests of the AA at heart, but it does not wish to get involved in the academic or cultural side. What we must do, however, and we do wish to do, is to ensure a healthy context so that the unique dynamism which has been referred to in various papers in the last 2 weeks can thrive. What then are Council doing, apart from what we're specifically here for today to discuss? Firstly, fundraising. I would just remind you that on Council's initiative, the AA Foundation was launched this time last year. To date, it has raised over £400,000 when the covenants, the majority of the money is through covenants, become mature. And this has been at no cost whatsoever to the AA. In fact, you may be interested to know that Council members have personally contributed £12,000, so that in fact all the administration for getting this off the ground has been paid by them personally, and no inroads at all have been made into any of the money that has been contributed. Membership. There is undoubtedly a decreasing membership, which we're very aware of. And there is a need to establish much closer links with alumni, even if they don't become members when they immediately leave the school. One small thing we've started is monthly members' evenings with a particular member hosting them. But there's also an intention within this year to double the membership and thereby raise the income considerably. And this small insert has just been printed, again, not within the AA, outside by others, council members at their own cost. 80,000 of these have been printed asking people to join the AA and telling them the advantages of it, and these will be inserted within the next 2 weeks in all the technical magazines, Architectural Review, Architects Journal, Building Design, free of charge. This, we hope, will double the membership this year at the very least. The third element of this is finance. A sound financial base is the only guarantee for ensuring a healthy climate for the AA's future. And I'm sure nobody could disagree with that. But it has been declining very dangerously in the last few years. The AA is not a profit-making organisation, I hasten to add. It operates on a break-even budget system. In other words, it should end up with all the figures at the bottom of the balance sheet at the end of the year being noughts. But it has a large turnover of £3 million. And an organisation like that, particularly one like the AA, which in fact has an insured or semi-insured income from students, but has a lot of expenditure throughout the year, it needs to have some sort of reasonable contingency figure within that budgeting system to ensure that you do end up with all the zeros at the bottom. But I have to tell you that with 2 exceptions in the last 12 years, no budgets have been achieved. In other words, there have been losses in 10 of those years. And that now results in an accumulated debt of £690,000. These budgets, I would also remind you, are under the sole control of the chairman. It is his responsibility to make the budgets and to control the budgets and to ensure that, in fact, a loss, or to try and ensure that a loss is not made. Coming more recently, in 1987-88, the accounts showed a very large loss, which meant that our auditors had no alternative but to qualify the accounts for the first time. This is really a notice to the public, if they wish to see it in Companies House, that an organisation is trading very, very close to the edge and needs to do something about it very urgently. You only have to look at the front page of Building Design today to see that Crichton went bust this week, extremely quickly. Once something like this happens, it is over in a flash. More than a year ago, both the Honorary Treasurer and the Auditor predicted that there was going to be a similarly large loss for the 88-89 year. But the Chairman strongly disagreed with this and was reluctant to take any action. In fact, sadly, and I mean sadly, the Honorary Treasurer and the Auditor were proved to be right, and the Chairman was proved to be entirely wrong, and a further loss in the 100,000 category was there. You should also know that the Chairman was reluctant to take any action in spite of one of the conditions of the qualification being, and I quote, the ability of the association to make profits in ensuing years. The reason that it now has to make profits is it has to actually claw back that loss of 690,000. By last autumn, the situation was very serious, and Council unanimously passed the following resolution, and I quote again, while this Council confirms its confidence in the ability of the Chairman to run the academic side of the school within the terms of his current contract, the serious qualification of the 87-88 accounts and the progressively deteriorating financial situation requires that stringent financial control be implemented at once if the AA is not to be put into serious jeopardy in the immediate future. As a result of that very serious situation, Council set up a finance group. Although this was, again I have to say, actively resisted by the Chairman. Attempts had been made last summer to do this, and although 2 meetings took place, they became so unproductive that the Chairman at that time persuaded Council that they were not worth having. And this is also in the context that the chairman and myself and other members of the council had been made alarmingly aware of the implications by the AA solicitor and the auditor face to face of the consequences of not taking firm action to actually prevent the financial situation deteriorating further. And I think this is really a key issue. It doesn't matter what sort of organisation it is, whether it's a charity or whether it's a business or whatever. If it actually can't exist, it can't exist. Since then, this finance group, which consists of a number of councillors, it consists of the chairman and some of his staff, have been working hard to actually ensure that in this current year we try and make the first of these profits to claw back the deficit. But I have to also say that it's been very difficult, or we found it very difficult, persuading the chairman to save rather than spend money. There is, however, some optimism that a small profit may be achieved for this financial year, but it's certainly going to be less than we hoped it would be at the beginning. I would also just point out at this point that, in fact, the assets, you may have been told, the assets being the library, the slide library, all those sorts of things, have been revalued in order to minimize the next qualification. And that value has gone up. But that actually has no effect on this trading deficit. That is only relevant if, in fact, God forbid, an end came and those items had to be sold. So it's actually really of no relevance to this discussion. The very most that can be anticipated of a profit this year is 200,000, and it doesn't take many people to work out how many years one needs to actually claw 200,000 back per annum to get the cells straight again. Now I'd like to just go on to the current situation and firstly deal with the process of the chairman's contract itself. Council in November initiated the setting up of what became called the Joint Advisory Working Group, which, as I've said, consists of 3 constituents: staff, students and council. And at this time I was very careful to explain to the chairman what exactly the intentions were, and he agreed without any opposition that, in fact, whatever the Joint Advisory Working Group's recommendations were as to whether a referendum should then be called, he would go along with. In other words, if Jorg said there will be a referendum, we'd like a referendum, then he'd agree with it. Similarly, if they said the opposite, he would also agree with it. Now, as most of you know, there have been very wide-ranging discussions on Jorg, and the following points have been agreed: the establishment of the Alpha Group, the appointment of a financial advisor to support and help the chairman in this very difficult financial situation. I should tell you, though, that in fact the part-time consultant role, which in fact is what we are now going along with, was not Council's desire. Council felt that it should actually have a full-time financial officer, which in fact we gave the name of Bursa. There was a lot of resistance to that, both from the staff and student members and from the chairman, and we conceded on that point in the hope that a part-time financial advisor would be sufficient. A review of the Secretary's office, income to be increased through fundraising and membership, which I've partly referred to already. The thing that was not agreed, as you all know, was the length of the term. Although both parties in those meetings put forward their views in this respect. And during this process, each party reported back, or we presume the other parties reported back, to their constituents on those matters. Finance was discussed at those meetings, although we have been very aware that we wanted to try and keep the financial situation as private as possible. And I did in fact offer to speak to staff and students, through Jorg this was, on the financial situation. And I wrote a long paper over Christmas last year, but that invitation was never forthcoming. The last Joint Advisory Working Group meeting, in fact, was on the 27th of February, although this wasn't intended to be the last one. An agenda, agreed by all parties, for the school community was begun to be discussed at that meeting, only begun, I hasten to add, and the next meeting was fixed for the 6th of March. However, this meeting was cancelled by the staff and student members, and we were told that they felt they'd done their work and that now it was for Council to negotiate the new contract with the chairman. Council then presented a contract to the chairman on the 13th of March. And I then went through Alvin's comments with him, and there were changes made to it, and a new contract, or an amended contract, was presented to him again on the 24th of March. That's nearly 2 months ago. And since then, there has been deadlock. There have been personal meetings, there have been conversations, there have been a large exchange of letters, which we'd be more than happy to publish, but are not prepared to unless the chairman agrees. And that is the deadlock we've been in. Now that contract, before I go on, is based on the existing contract, the contract that is operating at the moment. It has all those points that I've just referred to, which were agreed jointly in JORG within it, with the exception of their request for the 5 years. In addition to that, it has a threefold enhanced pension provision for Alvin. In other words, the pension provision has gone up 3 times. And it has in it the opportunity for the chairman to continue beyond this term. But it is a package in itself. It's a complete package, and it must be viewed as a whole. And it's no good thinking that you can actually substitute one item without altering the overall. Now, in that respect, I'd like to elaborate on 2 particular points. Firstly, the issue of 3 years, and secondly, the opportunity to continue. Firstly, why 3 years? Well, the bottom line to this is, within the context that I've given you, it would be professionally negligent on the part of Council to offer anyone, more than 3 years at this particular time. As I've said, it's going to be at least a 3-year climb financially till we're straight. And this view is firmly endorsed by the AA's professional, legal and accountancy advisors. So first, the AA's deficit must be reduced, and to do that, we need to see the financial advisor in place and working. There are also, I suspect there are always unknowns on the horizon, but I can be specific about what the unknowns on this horizon are at the moment. The lease on this building comes up on Christmas Day. We've had very good professional advice on what the likely rent is likely to be. And that advice is that it's going to be at least 2.5 times what it is now. We've had a much higher percentage increase demanded for the Percy Street accommodation, and because of planning permission being applied for on that premises, we've also had notice to quit. So the chances are either way that we will have to leave Percy Street. Partly as a result of this, and partly as a result of the deficit itself, student fees are going to increase, as you all know, 15% next year, and are likely to increase above the rate of inflation the year after. And there are also, which we're trying to resist, but there are also falling student numbers. The key, therefore, to the problem that we're now in is that the contract, which is based on the existing contract, and bear in mind that is the only contract that the chairman would accept, is a very powerful contract. It is not just the contract for an academic head of school. It's a contract, it's an all-embracing contract for a chief executive which controls money, staff, everything, as well as the academic side. It invests total power in one person's hands as the chief executive. And that is the key to why 3 years is so important. If it was only an academic contract that we were talking about, then Council would take a much different view. But we know that the present chairman will only accept this contract. One must also remember that, in fact, in the light of all the context that I've given you, that however sad it may be, the present chairman will not be here forever. And part of the discussions within JORG and the establishment of such things as the Alpha Group actually recognise that. And there must be the seeds of a new organisation in place to eventually succeed him. Council is ultimately responsible. This responsibility is for the AA overall, but it's also actually responsible for the welfare of the chairman, the welfare of the staff, the welfare of the students. And I therefore ask you in this context, why not 3 years? Council believes that this is the only alternative within this contract. It's a fair, a reasonable, and a totally appropriate contract in these circumstances. And we do not believe that it will actually adversely affect the opportunity for continuity of freedom, dynamism, regeneration, etc. of the unit system. After all, academic staff only have 1-year contracts, and that doesn't affect that dynamism. Secondly, I wanted to deal briefly with the opportunity to continue. In the first contract offered to the chairman, we had a new clause added, which was offering him continuity in the employment of the AA for as long as he wished. And the idea of that was that when he was no longer chairman, he would wish to be involved with the AA and perhaps, and I only say this as perhaps, might have become responsible for publications or something like that. He firmly rejected this. However, there is still within the old clause the opportunity for him to be considered for continuation beyond this term. So where are we now? My letter of the 16th of May, which I was asked to withdraw, was necessary because during this 2-month deadlock, it's never been entirely clear from the correspondence from the chairman as to whether he had actually rejected the contract. It was necessary from a legal point of view to establish whether he had actually rejected it. And that's why that letter was written, and there was no answer to it, and therefore he has effectively rejected it. However, let me make it quite plain, if the school community wishes so, the council would be more than happy to represent that contract. It would be happy to discuss minor amendments within it, but it would not be prepared to change the 3 years. So where do we go from now? On the 18th of May, which was after the deadline, I wrote to staff and student representatives of the Joint Advisory Working Group asking to meet them this week, in fact the week we're in, to discuss the future. And because it is Council's view that the Joint Advisory Working Group in all its parts, not the individual members of it, should, if appropriate, call a school community meeting to discuss the future. And we still believe that this is the case, that this meeting in fact was preempted by the school community meeting today by being called by 2 parts of JORG. Nevertheless, I would again reiterate that invitation which I made on the 18th of May to meet, and I would suggest that next Tuesday evening, the 29th of May, at 6:30 in the library for JORG, representatives of staff and students, or if this meeting you decide that in fact it is another body of representatives of the staff and students, meet Council to discuss the future at that time. Council are unanimous in their view, and Council, whatever you may think of us, are not fools. The chairman, in his nearly 19 years here, has made no secret of his contempt for Council. But over that period, can you really believe that all those councillors were fools? You have a list, you know the list of names, they're a diverse list of names, and they are all unanimous in this view. But council is equally extremely concerned for the long-term future of the AA, and it's really tried to resolve this matter within these four walls in order not to rock the stability in any way. Others have now chosen to take it into the public realm, which we consider to be irresponsive and counterproductive. We, at the end of the day, are concerned about the future of the AA, and that is more important than anything. So when you come to your meeting, I would urge you on a number of points. Be prudent. Be careful. Think of the AA and its best interests. Do not inflame the situation unnecessarily. We are trying to be responsible. We ask you to be responsible as well. And think very fully of the consequences of any action you may decide to take, because you want to be very sure of your ground before you actually go down a road that there may be no way back on. Council is serious, and Council is the AA at heart, and it is responsible. And this issue is not about who is right, it's about what is right. Staff and students' futures should not be at stake, and Council undertakes that they will not be at stake if a responsible attitude is taken. But without a responsible Council, that may not be possible. So I say to you, take heed, for we must all work in the same direction for the future strength of the AA, not for its demise. Finally, I'd just like to summarise the key points that I hope I've made. Firstly, Council is committed to the future of the AA. Council is committed to the continuation of the AA and will not allow it to become insolvent, whatever the odds. That is, it is quite determined at that. 3, Council does not wish to interfere in the academic freedom of the school. And finally, Council is supportive of Alvin, despite some of the difficulties, and it wishes him to continue for the next 3 years. But the contract is too powerful for it to be any more than 3 years. We would be seen in the eyes of the law to be, in the light of what I've told you, to be professionally negligent if we did not have a contract which had a time scale in it which was realistic to recover the deficits I've referred to, and we estimate that that will take 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Are there any questions that you wish to address to the President at this time? Yes?
Yeah, I just want to clarify one point, which is the role of the councils in accepting the budget from the chairman. In the 12 years which contained deficits, all budgets, I presume, were approved by council, so that the responsibility for those deficits would lie with both parties. Your talk implies that Alvin had power over that, and the offer for 3 years also does. But you will approve at every stage. I mean, all the council, when it's what it was then, approved at every stage of all those budgets. Is that right?
That, I mean, I can't speak for Council before I was there,
No, I'm
but
saying
in principle, yes, Council budgets are presented and approved by Council. That is correct.
So all of us,
They over, I think it's every 3 or 4 months they are represented to Council, having been updated. But Council can only go by what it's told, if you follow what I mean. If the budget says X, well then we can only go by what it's told. Council doesn't interfere and find out what, you know, if perhaps it's not quite correct.
yes, the only point I'm trying to make is that in whoever the council was in those 12 years, I mean, this situation or the financial problems could have come up earlier. I mean, there were serious years with deficits where this could have happen.
It's only got
Secondly-
really, yeah, that's
yeah,
you're correct.
Sorry, secondly, I'd like to say that obviously in this 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, council still has a responsibility, and now they have a finger on the button.
Correct.
So therefore, council will have this role of overseeing whatever the contract, what the financial situation is.
More so with the financial advisor, that's correct. But I would just like to say to that, it's only in the last 2 years that the financial losses have become very large.
Edward?
This is just following on from what Carlos has said as a point of information. No council at the AA, in all the years that Alvin has been chairman of the school, has ever approved a deficit budget. They have approved budgets in principle, presented to them many months ahead of the actual year for those budgets. They've always approved budgets which show a surplus. They have then not interfered with the way Alvin actually operates those budgets. But they've always asked Alvin to apply adequate margins of safety by introducing contingencies in those budgets. That's just the
I have a question. You're saying the rate losses have appeared in the last 2 years. I have a question. Have in the overdraft allowances of the school, have they been touched in the last 2 years?
Pascal is asking President to comment on the relationship between the deficits that have been reported here and the overdraft facilities available from the bank. Have the overdraft facilities been exceeded at any time? That's correct?
The overdraft facilities are used to not to the full, but are used, and there is, I believe I'm right in saying, a proviso that that overdraft facility can be exceeded for short periods, which in my time on council it has. But there has always been a difference of opinion between council and the chairman on, and I'm no accountant, so don't ask me any questions on it, between cash flow, which the chairman puts great faith in and handles very cleverly. In other words, there is always enough money there, but good cash flow doesn't actually mean that you end up with a profit at the end of, or a break even at the end of the year.
Good question over here. Could you speak loudly, because you won't get around the corner.
You very carefully told us that also seem to imply that your responsibility is going to be a problem. It's not true.
You're referring to this year's budget. If this year's budget does show a surplus of £200,000, then the council's criticism is replaced by gratitude for having achieved such a figure. Presumably that's correct?
Well, obviously the council's gratitude is there, but I would suggest to you that it wouldn't have been possible had the finance group not insisted upon it. That 200,000 target was not there before the finance group was in place.
You seem to be implying the deficit is all the chairman's responsibility.
No, let me make it quite clear. As I understand it, all members of the council are financially responsible for the debts of the AA. In addition, the chief executive is as, if not more, responsible. And Alvin, in these terms, the terms I'm talking about, is the chief executive.
John, then I'll come to you.
John Fraser, Diploma School. Why does council regard it as realistic to retrieve this money in 3 years, and why are you getting financial advice that that is an appropriate time to retreat as a large sums of money? seems to be out of proportion to the size of the losses in the overall budget. And it's much more realistic to look at that over a 5 or 10 year period.
We don't yet have the benefit of the financial advisor, but if we can, and the chairman is quite clear on this, he believes that 200,000 is the most you could ever achieve in a profit in any year. And we've got to see whether that is actually working. And therefore, that is why in 3 years' time, hopefully, that will have almost brought it back to square one.
Sorry,
To return to that point.
you said it was not relevant to this discussion, that the assets have been revalued. But you just said the council are concerned about their own positions if they're seen to be trading in an insolvent position. Now, the insolvency is indeed actually conditional upon those assets. So the legal position over council's liability is very considerably affected by that revaluation. Therefore, the purpose of the revaluation was in fact to defend the position of the auditor's qualifying remarks. And that extra information on revaluation ought to be enough to convince council that they could reconsider the position.
That is not entirely true. The situation is that the last thing council would want to be would be to sell one book or anything like that, is the first thing. The second thing is that that revaluation, and I don't know the details of this, but that revaluation is on a going concern basis. That means that on the assumption that the AA is a going concern and you had time and etc. to sell those items. If in fact those items had to be sold very quickly by a liquidator, that figure would probably come down to a quarter of the value.
Over there.
Yeah, I'd like to know if Michael Foster is concerned for the long-term prospects of the school, who he has in mind to succeed Alvin as chairman.
Who are you, please?
I'm Will McLean and I'm a student at the AA.
No one. No thoughts been given to that.
Yes, sorry. No, seat opposite here.
Yes, my name's Rose Jackson and I'm a first-year student. It's a sort of logical point about the reasoning. You say that it's a 3-year climb until we'll be financially straight. Therefore, you need a 3-year contract because of the all-embracing nature of the contract. Could you not, by the same argument, that say that because of the all-embracing nature of the contract, the 3-year, it being 3 years, is bound to have effects on the academic running of the school as well? I mean, if you say you can't separate it one way, you can't separate it the other way, it would seem to me.
Well, that's only one thing I said. What I said was also that it would be professionally negligent of us as the governors to actually look forward in contract terms, not in the overall future of the AA, but in specific contract terms for more than 3 years.
We'll take a couple from the back. Did somebody around you, George, raise their hand before? Was it you? Okay.
To 3 years to address the problem of negligence.
Yes, the question is, why is it thought to be negligent to have a contract exceeding 3 years?
Well, I don't want to go over that again. I hope that I've adequately explained that. Well,
If you have no idea to succeed in 3 years, how can you say that you're planning for the future? If you have no idea, if you've got nobody in your head that you can think can actually take hold of the school and run it in a fashion that you'd like it to be run, then how can you say you're concerned with a long-term sort of future?
hold on, it's not just us who would be entering the discussion as how the school would run, it would be you, not just us.
I've got some ideas, but I'm not talking.
Sorry, would you?
Asking some questions.
I don't want to get in.
No. Would you please wait until called to ask a question and restrict your questions to that of fact? We can all talk our interpretations later of what Martin's been saying, I'm sure. Yes.
You say you don't have the benefit of your financial advisor, but why, I think quite a few of us here do not seem very clear about why it's approved. It strikes me as being very ambitious, unrealistically speaking, that over the past 10 years we may have accumulated this huge deficit. And in 3 years we're planning to gain back 600,000. To me, that is a gamble which you cannot guarantee as a council, which will actually be, will go against the true ambition of the school in the academic sense. You cannot guarantee that the academic interest of the school will be affected by a 3-year period. And on that basis, a lot of us are really worried. 3 years and 10 years is a very ambitious program. 5 years is much more realistic.
Well, I've obviously said what I've said. What I'm saying is that, in fact, we have to get out of this current problem in the short term. And what I've tried to emphasize is that what we're discussing here is an organization that has to be there, a framework that has to be there for that academic freedom to exist. And if you don't actually have a framework which is financially sound, then the discussions about academic freedom, etc., tend to become rather irrelevant.
You mentioned £400,000 being raised by the AA Foundation at £600,000 deficit and £200,000 social this year. Shouldn't that guarantee the solvency of the year?
It will obviously help, but you must realize that there have been, and I can't comment on them in detail, there have been a number of assets over the years of the AA that have been sold, like I believe there was a playing fields and things, which in fact have been sold for the refurbishment of this building, etc., etc. None of those assets now exist. There have also been fundraising attempts. I think there's a thing called an AA Development Fund, which have been very, very, have accrued a very small amount. The thing about the AA Foundation, which has appeared to work, is that in fact it has separate trustees, and people have given large amounts of money because it's not actually going in to the direct trading of the AA. What it's hopefully to be used for is such things as bursaries, possibly an extension to the library or the refurbishment of the library, that sort of thing. It doesn't actually, it obviously helps to have it there, but it doesn't actually affect the need for an organization such as the AA to actually make enough money to pay for the money that it spends.
Just a second. Was somebody just here raise their hand a moment ago?
We're getting into sort of...
Yes, I think this is a point of debate rather than fact. Sorry. It was merely commenting on a matter of opinion that 3 years is inadequate in order to carry out an educational programme. 5 years is quite more satisfactory. But Michael is not wishing to enter into that as a discussion.
Without it here, then maybe there'll be a reason
you're making a point, not asking a question, and I'm sure Michael has noted the point you had. So,
Well, just
it is repeating the same point as was made by one of the previous speakers, that 5 years is more appropriate for an educational programme than 3. Sorry, David, I'll come to you, Carlos.
My comment is only a feature on that. I just want to check with Michael, the figures we were given were right. Sorry, I'm David Graydon, Clement Tutor. The figure you gave us for an accumulated debt at this time is 690,000.
Yeah.
And the figure you gave us for debt achieved 88.9 was 100,000. And you anticipate, hopefully, a profit this year of 200,000.
No, can I just
Have I misunderstood?
can I just make, perhaps I wasn't absolutely clear, I can make that clear. The deficit as it stands now is 690,000. The loss in 87-88, no, yes, 87-88,
You didn't actually give us the
I didn't give you
figure.
that, was 170,000,
Was that part of the 690?
yes.
Yes. And
The loss in 88-89, which is also part of the 690,
Yes.
is 155,
Yes.
right?
So far, very comprehension together.
Yes.
Now, my question simply is that if 88.9 achieved a loss of 100,000, and you anticipate a gain in the current year, and that's without the benefit of the financial advisor, or amateurs together presumably, of 200,000. That is an improved rate, as it were, of 300,000. Now, this would seem to me, in any situation with the turnover that the AA has, a pretty optimistic situation, that a touch on the rudder has been achieved here, because there was no truncation of, no noticeable truncation of AA activities in the current year, and we've achieved this.
We haven't achieved it yet.
Well, no, okay, but we are looking that way, and it looks feasible. You would have decided it, I hope. Now, what I'm posing is that in the light of that, it does seem to me that the immensely destabilizing effect, and you must be aware of the immensely destabilizing effect of the 3-year optional contract, which is going to make this whole ship shudder and litter rock, must vastly outweigh the argument you have put forward for a 3-year contract. And I just cannot understand why the Council cannot see that any theoretical arguments in favour of a 3-year contract are vastly overweighed by the potential, as I say, destabilizing effect. And to me, I can't see why that is prudent. I think it's extraordinarily rash.
Well, all I can say is I've explained it to the best of my abilities.
I think if you would confine your questions to the example of the first part of David's question to clarify the figures.
Yeah.
I'm not sorry, excuse me, I'm not that sure, David. You said something about 300,000, and I don't know what
Well,
you made that up.
if we achieve a deficit in 1 year of 100,000, and we're anticipating a profit of 200,000, I add those together and make it 300, pointing in the right
Well,
direction.
you add a deficit and a profit.
You can't do that.
A deficit you take away and a profit you add on. You don't get 300,000.
I'll explain to you.
I'd like to ask for some clarification that 10 years ago, I believe approximately 10 years ago after contract negotiations, Council, albeit not this Council, actually did determine that the 3-year contract was disruptive and recommended that a 5-term contract would be in the best interest of the school. And as far as I recall, that would be in the term of the 12 years of continuing deficits and also within the 12-year of the term of Alvin's chairmanship. Is that true? And why would this?
I believe that is true. I don't know the full facts, but I would suggest to you that the situation we're in now is a very different one from the situation we're in then.
I'd like to ask, following Alvin's rejection of your proposed 3-year contract, under what parameters the current council is prepared to offer a referendum to the school?
I don't really understand what you're saying. I mean, I can't answer that. I can't answer that.
I'd like to, Mark from Law, Intermediate School student. I'd like to put a number of things regarding this
Well, can I? No,
unless you're asking
I'm going
a question.
I think it's time I.
Can you allow me a moment? Unless you're asking a question, Mark, I can't let you continue. Are there any more questions of fact on the report? I think Michael did answer that. He said that at the end of the 3 years, that the position would be open. The question was that Michael had stated that council were prepared to extend Alvin's employment beyond the 3 years as a condition of this present. Yes.
No, no.
But
if I could just.
Excuse me. Just hang on, both of you.
Sorry. Sorry.
The comment that you didn't hear was that Michael had stated that the council was prepared, within the contract which they had offered to Alvin, to include a clause which had not previously been discussed or agreed, but a clause that his employment might continue for such length of time as he himself might determine in the future, not as head of school, but in some other role which might be agreed at that time. Michael also stated, and correct me if I'm wrong, that nothing in the contract excluded Alvin from being considered as as continuing as chairman after that 3 years. There was no condition that disbarred him from that negotiation.
That's correct.
Thank you. Another question or fact?
I'm sorry to raise the question again. It was not answered the last time around from someone in the rear. I asked the question that it was not clear to any of us on this side of the room. Correlation between the 3-year period and professional responsibility in terms of operating that length of contract. You made the statement several times, but not once have you said why. And I would like to have that explained to me. Evidently, we are thick.
Very briefly, in a situation like this, council is ultimately responsible and must be seen to be actually putting the matter straight. And we're at a stage now where this hope for 200,000 has not yet been achieved. It may not be achieved. And therefore, in an unknown situation like that, it would be irresponsible of us to automatically continue the role of the chief executive, who has been partly party to the losses that we've had, beyond a limited period.
Sorry, I think can we take that as an answer, please? I think you're questioning the judgment of the council, not on a question of fact. It's their judgment that this is what is responsible action and what would be irresponsible action.
Is that the case then?
Yeah.
It's the judgment
and the council and professional advice. The AA's professional advisors.
Questions of fact. I'm going to cut you off shortly.
That was not an answer. The question was why? Why? Simply repeated the statement.
I have given my answer.
Here, at the back there.
In the last 10 years, and what assets have been gained in terms of non-financial position, in terms of the wealth or lack of wealth of the school, and the direction in terms of shifting investments and acquisition, please.
Are you in a
You
position
mentioned,
to-
I can't answer. I can't.
I'm sorry, but I appreciate Michael's situation here. He can't answer that in that sort of detail, but I'm sure that it's not something that directly affects our debate today. And should you wish to pursue that point, no doubt the Secretary's office
The
will give you
information could be made
proper
available.
answers.
And a key question, I think is relevant to our debate today, if I may, which is that we really need to know whether there is any genuine room for debate between this school community and the present council over this issue of the contract. Because you're trying to persuade us that council are acting responsibly, they're being reasonable, and so on. The reality is that you've been kind enough and bold enough to stand up there at the front, but you're not, on the other hand, prepared to involve in the debate. And do council not realise that there are many people in this room who find the excuse of this taking petulance by council and not turning up to this meeting over not being consulted by the joint working group is seen by many people in this room to be a pathetically lame excuse for not involving themselves in real debate.
I can report that, but if you had seen the draft agenda that we...
Sorry, you're not asking
Sorry.
a question of...
Is the debate, the question is there room for debate or not with the present council?
Of course there's room for debate. And the present council, as I stated in my statement, wished to have a school community meeting which would widen the debate.
Why not this one? Why don't we have another one?
Yes, you. Yes.
There was a point made earlier, Robert Goldsmith, the primary school. A point made, what are the parameters within which the discussion can be taken today then? And if there is space for debate, which you just said, what are the areas that the debate can take place today?
Well, what I've explained to you is that this...
The question was, within what areas can the debate be extended between the school community and council?
What I was going to say was that the contract that was presented to the chairman is a very powerful, all-embracing contract, which is the only contract that he would accept. Therefore, within the terms of that contract, there are obviously details that can be discussed, but the 3 years is firm. If, in fact, there was a different sort of contract, but bear in mind we're starting from the position that he would not accept any different form of contract. If there's a different form of contract, then of course there is a wide range of points that can be discussed.
Yes.
Do you know what the percentage of income student fees are, first of all? I'm just wondering. And if that's at all relevant, don't you think that forcing 3 years to claw ourselves back is pushing ourselves to a very shaky ground?
I can't answer that. I can't answer that fact of what the percentage of.
Surely it must be a major consideration, Council. It's a very good question.
I can't answer the fact of what the quantity.
Yes, the question was what proportion of the income of the association came from student fees.
It's by far the greatest income.
Yes, and the question following that was, did the President not consider that to impose a liability of regaining £200,000 a year was a burden on that income, which was perhaps unreasonable?
May I just say something which seems to be coming across in all these questions? You seem to be taking a rather simplistic view about 3 years. This is in 3 years in a context of an ongoing situation. It's also in the context of the previous 19 years. So you seem to be thinking that we're only looking 3 years ahead. We're only looking 3 years ahead for cautious reasons, because we can't look further ahead than that. In this particular instance, we're certainly not restricting our thoughts to only 3 years as far as the AA overall is concerned.
Can I just add a point of fact? If a commitment to making a surplus of £200,000 hadn't been made by this council, we would not be here today.
That's correct.
Who are you?
I'm the secretary of the AA, and I don't say that as an opinion. That is a fact which was given to the council and to the chairman at the time that the last accounts were approved by the auditors of the AA, who said the AA would have to shut down unless that commitment was made, and the council and Alvin readily made that commitment. I understand it is a very severe penalty on the AA, but that's the situation.
Has the council considered seriously the option of disposing of an expensive building rather than expensive chairman?
Does not have a lease as of
No.
it has.
You don't dispose of it, but you dispose of the possibility of paying 3 times more.
That is certainly an option that could be discussed.
It's nice industrial.
But I didn't want anyone to think that.
On the point of 3-year contract in financial terms, as you say that you can't perceive giving any chairman at this time any length more than 3 years, but that then reflects on the fees which are for students, the majority of the finances in the school. Any chairman who is viewed at having to turn around the school within 3 years is obviously going to have to do some drastic financial juggling within the school, and fees are already going up more than inflation to try and compensate for some of the debts that we have.
I don't wish to...
Within 3 years, you can't get a covenant for finances that will mature within 3 years.
I think you have to accept Edouard's answer to that question, that Edouard related that unless an undertaking was given by council to produce £200,000 profit or surplus within the current year, that the auditors would not have passed the accounts.
Can I also...
The implications are, as you say, and I'm sure...
Can I also
you're
just...
as aware of the
yes,
implications as anybody else?
make a statement on that. There are the finance group, which is made up of people within the school and from outside the school, and some of whom are, like the Honorary Treasurer, are architects but very knowledgeable on financial matters, believe that with a £3 million turnover, there is an awful lot of room, without affecting the academic side of the school in any way, for actually clawing back that money. But there's got to be a desire to do that.
Could you restrict yourselves to questions on matters of fact? Because I'd like to move the meeting on to the next item on the agenda.
You stated that income from students is the main income for the school.
Yeah.
Well, the length of the course for students entering next year is 5 years. So if I was entering school for a 5-year course and I knew the chairman was going to change in 3 years, I'd probably go to another school. And wouldn't that affect the intake of students coming in next year?
I don't...
Can you just note the comment? I mean, I
All right.
don't think you can answer the question. Yes?
Well, can I just answer that by saying that Council of the Governors, they're not the executive officers of this organisation. The chairman is the executive officer of this organisation, and that, with council, is his responsibility.
I think, unless I would like to move on to the next item on the agenda. Is this a question of fact?
Firstly, you mentioned the foundation that's been set up by the council and the sum of £400,000. Can you clarify how that money can be used? Is it actually that amount of money? As I understood it, it was the interest on that money that was at our disposal and not the whole of that money, and how the council intends to use that money and whether that's...
Firstly, it's not council. let me just say, it's not council. I mean, so let's Sarah. Sarah's the secretary. Sarah's the secretary. Can she answer?
The councillors actually set it up.
Yeah, that's how I understood it.
But they set it up and they invited completely different people to the trustees. And it's up to those completely different trustees.
Advise.
And it was set up as a capital fund.
Yeah, that's
with the intention of only the interest being used.
That's what
but the capital can be.
Because it is a misleading figure to quote, I think, as it is only capital.
It is not spendable money.
Can I break in? These are the sort of questions which you could answer and doesn't need Michael's attendance. I must... Now, I must draw this part of the meeting to a close at this stage. I think the questions that you've asked on the Council's position have been adequately answered. The questions which remain can be answered by other people in the room without great difficulty. And as I said at the outset, I only managed to persuade Michael to come here today on the condition that he wouldn't be required to enter into a debate about the judgments to which Council had drawn from the facts which he has tried to put before us. And whilst I regret his insistence on that, I can very well understand the difficulty in which that entering into such a debate would put him. I'd like to thank him for his time and his indulgence. I would, however, like to ask him to stay if at all possible, because I think that a number of points that have been made to him as questions would be much more reasonably made to him as a silent witness of the meeting, that he could perhaps judge better the mood of the school by listening to our discussions rather than merely observing the resolutions which might result.
I'll consider that. No, I'm going to go to the back.
You're going to the...
I'm going out. No,
It's going to the gents. We haven't got a radio mic, unfortunately. It's one of the tricks we play on visitors from time to time. If we could move on now. Somebody asked me a couple of days ago how long I expected the meeting today to last, and I said, it'd be over by 2:30. It's now 2:30, and we move on to the second or the third item on the agenda, and I'd like to call for reports from the members of the joint, whatever it is, JWAG, Joint Advisory Working Group. We'll have to call it something more pronounceable next time round. First reports. Names have been attached to these reports on the agenda, but I did ask the people concerned to try to ensure that their reports either went beyond the named person and introduced other people to speak, or as a minimum condition that they reported fully on all views that might have been expressed to them by others with whose views did not perhaps carry the day, but that you were informed of all the views and the expressions of desires that have been expressed to our representatives. I'd like to ask Peter Thomas to start this procedure. There is a mic. Do you want to move your chair closer so that I can sit down over here?
Thank you. I'm Peter Thomas, intermediate tutor. Nominated to be one of the representatives on the Joint Advisory Working Group back in November. I'd like to just start by saying that the present 5-year contract of the chairman of the AA school ends on the 14th of September 1990. The final part of Clause 1 of this contract states that before the end of the term, the appointment shall be reviewed by the council, which would include consultation with the school by means of the appropriate referendum. The consultative process commenced in November '89, when council addressed the staff and subsequently the student community. The consultative process to be followed was accepted as that detailed in the AA Council's paper for staff and students issued by the Secretary. Staff and student communities nominated representatives who then proceeded to meet with representatives from the council in a joint advisory working group to review the chairman's contract. Many JORG meetings were held. Initially, the main thrust of the views expressed was the need for wider discussion and the need for improved financial decision-making. In the meetings, council members repeatedly attacked the standards of education in the school. These attacks were strongly countered by staff and students representatives in those meetings. There was at the time great confusion as to whether views being expressed were individual councillors or the considered views of council. Though illuminating to hear the personal views of certain council members, a lot of time was wasted at the expense of discussion on what was to become the major issues. When it became clear that council were not prepared to offer a 5-year contract, staff meetings were held and a vote taken in that meeting of 48 members of staff by a show of hands. That vote showed 44 in favour of a 5-year contract, of the present contract being offered unchanged, I think was the exact wording. There were 4 abstentions. Following that, there was notification to the members of JORG that it was felt that maybe certain members of staff had felt intimidated by a show of hands, and therefore a ballot was arranged. The ballot contained clauses, all of which had been discussed in JORG. It was a secret ballot, and all the clauses that had been talked about in JORG were endorsed by those votes. By early March, all members of JORG had with their constituencies agreed the following 4 points, which Michael read out earlier, but I'll just, run through them very quickly. 1, that the contract will ensure the formation of the Alpha Group, a group composed of staff and students, which will encourage communication within the AA, particularly between units and between teaching and administrative staff. 2, that the chairman will benefit from the advice of an independent financial consultant, not a bursar. 3, that the efforts will be made by both council and school to step up the fundraising programme through closer contact with the AA alumni and membership. And 4, that the role of Secretary's Office be reviewed and set up to assist and coordinate fundraising activities. True to the timetable set out by the Council for the negotiating process, a contract was offered to the Chairman on the 13th of March. This was a 3-year contract. An amended contract was resubmitted on the 24th of March, but still proposing a 3-year term. 4 days later, the Chairman wrote to the President rejecting the 3-year term, but agreeing all other clauses. In the following 3 weeks, there was an exchange of letters and meetings between Council members and Chairman, and no progress was made. During this time, the contract began to be referred to as a package, and at the start of the summer term, staff and student representatives of JORG were informed of the impasse by the Chairman. A meeting of staff and student representatives of JORG was called, and the result was a letter sent to all members of Council, signed by all staff and student representatives. And I'd like to read that to you now. We, the undersigned JORG representatives of staff and students, are concerned that the term of the Chairman's contract remains unresolved, and disappointed that Council has not endorsed the views of the school community in this issue. We believe the AA school succeeds in the balance between the dynamic set of autonomous units and a stable long-term framework for the Chairman, and that a 5-year contract provides that stability. In our view, no acceptable argument has been made for anything less than the 5-year contract. This is the view of the school community. If the Council continues to offer a contract whose term is contrary to these wishes, it will lose the confidence of that body. We received no reply to this letter. 2 weeks later, having been told a reply was coming, an open letter to staff and students appeared, which you will all have received. The next day, without consultation with the school community or its representatives, the President issued an ultimatum to Alvin that unless he accept the package by noon, 18th of May, 48 hours later, the offer of a package would be withdrawn and his present contract would cease on the 14th of September. In this time, members of staff who felt that the views of staff were being put forward to council as unanimous views of the staff, organised petitions, which you will see downstairs, which are aligned on the following issues. 1, to Alvin, we want you to continue, please accept the 3-year contract. 2, to council, we want to know that contrary to the impression given by Jorg in their recent statement, the entire school community is not unanimous and the statement does not wholly represent your views. This was done in response to people's opinions that people were not confident about speaking out in public if they felt an objection to backing the chairman for a 5-year contract or feeling that a 5-year contract was relevant. And those 2 positions are out in the school to be signed by people who have those views. Where am I? May the 17th. It now gets down to dates, so we get exciting now. May the 17th, Jorg representatives on learning of the ultimatum faxed a letter to the President, copied to all council members, demanding a withdrawal and informing them that today's school community meeting would be called to discuss the situation. On May the 18th, the day of the deadline, that day was marked by a flurry of paperwork. Building Design published an article on its front page stating that agreement had not been reached. None of the points that appeared in that article had ever been discussed with the school. And this article appeared in the morning, hours before the deadline of the ultimatum issued to Alvin. This was a deplorable act of bad faith, and the article appeared on the front page, again before the deadline was reached. At 4 p.m. that day, staff and student representatives of Jorg received a faxed reply to their letters of the 4th and 16th of May, inviting us to discuss plans for the future of the school. It was agreed that 2 members would report to council on the draft agenda of this meeting and to hear their views only. We felt that we were not mandated to go on your behalf and talk about the future of the school. We went to hear what positive things they had to say to this meeting. That report on Tuesday's meeting I'd like to give after the student representatives have given their report. Thank you.
I thought it best in drawing out the agenda that we should hear all the reports and then ask questions at the end. Because some of your questions on what Peter said may well be answered by the following speakers. Chorus of continuing. John comes early, Adam, David Adams, and Pete Thomas will then return with his further report. Yes.
Even if silent.
There is a visible witness, actually, in case it doesn't come back.
The tape.
The video.
Videotape.
The visible witness will be recorded, so he could look at it afterwards.
I don't know if he is in the room or not. And if he is in the room, I'm sure he's witnessing what's going on. If he isn't, then there's not much I can do about it. I mean, the seat here is very welcome to say.
The undertaking was that you would report back to council the view.
No, that was not the undertaking. No, I asked him to, I suggested to him that might be a very prudent way to proceed, but that was not the undertaking. Now, his condition to me of coming to the meeting was that he would make the first presentation and then leave. I advised him that I thought he ought to answer questions on the presentation that he would make, because there may be questions of fact which weren't clear, and he agreed to do that. And then, as you heard, I suggested to him then that it might be more beneficial if he were to stay and actually listen to what was being said rather than to only hear the outcome of the meeting, but at no time did he give any undertaking to remain. Can you continue with the reports, please?
Thank you, Dennis. My name is John Comparelli. I'm in the diploma school. We're just going to give you a very brief account, a student account of the Joint Advisory Working Group meetings. The AA Council convened a meeting in November with the students to suggest that we nominate some members to sit on this Joint Advisory Working Group, or what's later to become JOG. So 12 of us were nominated, and amongst the 12 of us, we decided, amongst that 12, 6 were nominated to sit on the Joint Advisory Working Group. The first thing we agreed on amongst the 12 of us was that we would try and keep this chairman's contract strictly about a chairman's contract, not about a contract with the present chairman, that this contract would be for any chairman in the future, the AA. The first meeting of the Joint Advisory Working Group was opened by Council with the claim that the school was past its golden era, suggesting that changes in the educational system may be appropriate. I think it's very important to bear in mind. It's the opening gambit of the council members on the Joint Advisory Working Group. During the following meetings, the student and staff representatives questioned how this criticism might be openly debated and how it would bear on the chairman's contract. Students and staff, the staff and students proposed that discussion on the contract should proceed in the context of what kind of school the AA is and what the school would like to be. Council's emphasis on the educational issue was replaced by school finances. However, the student and staff members of the JOG remained concerned with the educational criticism. Couldn't help but remember this first statement and thinking that maybe there was a bit of subterfuge going on. I'm stating what we all felt, which is an opinion, of course, amongst the group of us, but I'll call it fact. It seemed that changes proposed by Council stemmed from the educational criticism on which they wouldn't be drawn, preferring to discuss the financial issues.
Well, in the process of consulting students, we called 2 meetings with the student body. One was on December the 4th and the other on January the 12th. And in the process of these meetings, we developed 2 points of discussion, 2 principal points of discussion. The first was the desire amongst the students, well, the feeling amongst the students that there was a real need for a staff and student body to coordinate and encourage communication within the school, especially between units, to provide a vehicle for staff and students to support their work, discuss their work, and also, and importantly, a vehicle of communication between the council and the school, which would hopefully preempt the situation we're in now and help in future contract negotiations. So the body which would be known as the Alpha Group, and it was conceived as an intermediary and not as an intermediary group, not as the basis for a small group of for the discussion of school politics and so on. In short, the Alpha Group would allow staff and students to represent themselves to each other over specific issues. So it would be a vehicle for academic debate as well as political or grievances over administrative issues and so on. But principally an academic discussion could take place. The second point was that about the financial advisor that had been proposed by the council. The student body agreed that the chairman's office could benefit or should benefit from financial advice, but felt unable to comment on a post because we were unable to provide them with a job description from the council of what that post might be. So in addition to that, the students felt very strongly that there should be a concerted fundraising programme like those in many other private educational institutions around the world. And it was agreed that the fundraising could stem from 3 directions, led by council and administered, led in part by council and administered from the Secretary's office in part. For example, a non-governing group of trustees who could be drawn from amongst prominent people in the architectural world connected with the school, or who could become connected with the school. An ongoing system of support from graduate students and alumni of the school, as well as the wider association membership. and thirdly, through activities and events organised from within the school community itself. These were the issues that were raised, and there were others, but we did not discuss the issue of the number of years of the contract.
David Evans. After a further series of JOG meetings, Council ultimately offered a 3-year contract. The student representatives were surprised, as reason for this seemed inadequate. Furthermore, the representatives felt that introducing such a crucial issue at this late date, affecting the whole dynamic of the school, was inappropriate. After all the student discussions proceeded in the context of a 5-year period. At that point, we made our views clear and our meetings came to an end, with that difference in mind. A quiet period followed as the Council and Chairman continued negotiations. Eventually it became clear that progress would not be achieved. By the beginning of the 3rd term, the student representatives decided to petition the student body to assess support for the 5-year term and to justify the reasons for doing so. Following the first 35 signatures, the petition was disseminated without any further involvement from the student representatives. Approximately 165 more signatures were received. Other petitions asking Elvin to support the 3-year contract can be signed, as well as a petition of dissent from the 5-year petition. Events followed very quickly now. The Council distributed an open letter explaining their support for a 3-year contract. The same day, a letter was presented to the Chairman noting his employment would cease on September 14th if he did not sign the 3-year contract by 4 p.m. 2 days later. The petition was then faxed to the Council President, and in the events list of last week, the petition report was published. The events list also included a statement prepared by the staff and student representatives justifying the need for a 5-year contract in response to the Council letter and calling for this meeting. The ultimatum passed, and the Council President invited the representatives to reconvene JOG in order to discuss the future. 2 representatives met with Council, and Peter Thomas will report with this.
I shall now attempt the impossible, which is to stand up and be heard by everybody. David and I went and met the council in order to, certain council members, 7 people were there to meet us in the library on Tuesday night. Technical problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We felt that we would have no mandate to discuss the future of the school until after this meeting. We reported to them with a draft agenda of this meeting, which included a motion for a vote of no confidence in Council. Faxes from Peter Wilson and Nigel Coates in support of the school community were also handed to each member at that meeting. Several points were made clear by the Council members present. 1, that the same 3-year contract would be given to whatever chairman could be found next year, with a 3-year contract for a bursar. 2, that if no such chairman could be found, a temporary chairman could be installed. 3, that if a temporary chairman could not be found, the school would be governed on a day-to-day basis by a triumvirate of staff, students, and administrative staff. 4, that the 3-year contract is a package. 5, that the democratically arrived result of this meeting could, in Council opinion, destroy the school. 6, that the staff and student representatives have proceeded in a non-democratic way, in Council's opinion. 7, that this school community meeting be deferred and convened next week after a JORG meeting at which a chairman and agenda had been mutually agreed. These terms were very strongly worded to us. That is the end of my report, and I'd just like to say on behalf of all JORG members that from now on in this discussion, apart from questions of fact about our reports, we would be speaking as ourselves and not as your representatives, which I think I'd like to make quite clear at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I call on you two, Anne, to add the report?
Yes. I'd like to address my statement to the students of the school more than anyone else. And it's not necessarily a report, it's really a request. When we arrived here at this school, we arrived with a number of qualities. And the qualities that we arrived with were a consequence of our education. And they included the capacity to understand and learn, our intelligence, our curiosity, our motivation to learn, and our common sense, the way that we handle ourselves reasonably in any given situation. The AA, as an institute of further education, will have further educated us. In terms of AA years, the youngest of you in this room will be coming up to your first year, 1 year old. 1 year in which you will have been asked to extend your curiosity, to question everything. Also coming under question would have been your common sense. Why something is right and why something is wrong. Why should you restrict your imagination? Why do you not take everything into account? And from then, you would have applied your intelligence, you would have interpreted everything that you would have heard, read, and understood, and from there you would have developed an idea and planted the seed for a project. And this would have been something which you would have believed in, something which you would have carried forth to your juries, stood in front of your fellow students and your tutors, and you would have expressed your opinion. You would have said what you honestly believed in. And this is what you should do today. When you are asked later on in this discussion to assess both sides of an argument, do you feel that you've been given all the right information? Do you feel that you're taking into account both sides of an argument? Will you be doing justice to all the years of education which have asked you to take into account everything, never take anything for granted, and never be swayed by someone else's opinion? You have to do this because you owe it to yourselves. When I'm asked what my stand on this position is, I'm hesitant to reply because I do not feel I should influence another's viewpoint. However, I must say that from the statements that the President of the Council gave in his earlier speech, I can find none of that untrue. And from my experience on Council, through these proceedings, they have been very fair, and in the open letter to the staff and students, it was a very reasonable offer that they put forward. My ultimate loyalty is to this school, and the school is not one person, it's not just you or me, it's an idea, and we should maintain it, and it's our duty to ensure that it's here for others, and we shouldn't take a decision in haste which might result in the future of the school being closed down through ignorance. Listen to the arguments and make sure that you're not swayed, and make a good decision, please.
Do we have any questions on the reports that are being presented over here? Ms. Gretchen? Well, the question is what happens next with this meeting, and that is for the meeting to decide. The meeting, I hate using the word power because I don't think it's the right word to use, but the meeting has tremendous responsibility in what it decides to do. Even more so because we decided at the outset to allow press representatives to be present. So whatever we decide to do, we're deciding in public. It's not a sort of private thing. It is a serious meeting. On previous occasions, meetings such as this have decided against all reasonable advice that the school would continue as an independent body. It took quite some hours for the meeting to come to that conclusion. But in 1971, a meeting of the school community made just such a resolution, made many other resolutions on the same occasion. In 1967, a meeting faced with a rather different set of circumstances did pass a vote of no confidence in the members of council, or in the council of the association, together with, again, with a number of other resolutions. And that particular meeting, after some considerable further meetings and time, led to a resolution of the conflict which we were dealing with at that time. So the meeting does have great influence, but at the same time does have great responsibility, and I think that is what Huvan was also expressing, is that the responsibility is here, because apart from anything else, all of you are members of the voting constituency of the association. If you all decided to vote in a particular direction, then your view would carry the day. Past experience has shown that the views of the school community are usually, or have in the past been endorsed by the association if the matter was put to a vote of the entire association. That ultimately the association's feeling is that the school, whatever it may decide, is right, and if it was proved to be wrong later, then the school accepts the consequences of that decision. But could we come back to the point of questions on the reports presented? Do you have a question back there?
An educational chairman and separately a financial person. I'd just like to have that expanded if someone's willing to do that for us.
Would somebody like to answer that question?
I'm not sure.
I'm not a member of JOG, but I can tell you my experiences on bursars.
Sorry, was the question about why there should not be a contract which separated the academic from the administrative role?
Yes.
Sorry, can we shout back and forth to each other?
Yes, that's what is the argument against that separation, which is common in other educational establishments? The separation of the bursar and the academic chairman of an institution now.
It was represented to George that many people felt that in the context of the Architectural Association, that the activities involving the academic life required full responsibility for the financial side of things, and that is the contract which Alvin was given when he started, was to have total responsibility for both the academic side of life, the administrative side of life, and the financial side of life. And the idea of this sort of contract for him was endorsed by JOG. That is my recollection. An actual debate on this question, I mean, it's not the time and place for a debate on this question, but it was brought out at meetings where the staff made their representations to JOG. I speak as a staff representative on JOG. Did any of the students have a comment on that?
Yes. One of the problems we found in the meetings was that we continually asked the council to provide a job description of what this post would involve. They weren't forthcoming in this for practically the whole time of these meetings, over a period of about 2 or 3 months. And when finally a job description was proposed and read out to us, it was it was such an extraordinary description of what that job could involve that we felt that one couldn't advertise such a post and actually expect anybody to achieve all the things that were set out in the job description.
Could I speak again, Liz? Because the areas in which it had been suggested financial advice was needed was not necessarily to be cast in the role of bursar, that is, a full-time staff member controlling, say, the financial side and the administrative side, but that it was agreed that there was the possibility of input in the many different areas which finances could be related to. That is, in the setting forth of budgets and the controlling of those budgets, in the concept of fundraising and the best use of what funds or what assets were available, in the expansion of the membership, in the expansion of the student body. It was far-ranging. I mean, Liz has addressed it in the particular context of this immediate situation. And the reason it came up in the context of the immediate situation in which we find ourselves is because of the financial difficulties. It was felt that there was the need for a kind of financial control and a kind of new input into financial matters. However, as I say, the staff certainly felt that this was not, the role of a bursar as such was not appropriate.
There was a very real, these building AA workshop, there's a very real reason for the staff objections to a bursar, as distinct from the financial advisor, the high-level financial advisor, which we have been discussing. A bursar, in a way, has connotations which interpose a layer of administration between the staff directly and the chairman in terms of the administration of budgets. This makes the structure of the AA less responsive as an organic structure, if you like, and this was our immediate response, if you like. That's why we objected to the bursar.
Dale, question?
Dale Benedict. I've been through this sort of thing quite a number of times. Never been as muddled as this is. And I can trace the beginning of the muddle to the first occasion that we any kind of organization is active in, especially as we get to this job. I don't know, you're in athletic here and running up and down and around the fair, that's one thing. But if you're involved in the school and so forth, it's another. And in that first meeting, in asking for the formulation of these groups, what really happened is that we want a group like us. Council is matters of fact. We want some other people who do matters of fact. The matter of fact was the very first one. Things that council put forward as their concern, not only financial, it was not only educational, quite carefully and kind of big low profile. It was also said, well, perhaps a 3-year contract might be considered by this group. Now, to some extent, I think that everyone has been put up on that. Because to some extent, everyone tries to act out that role of somehow or another constituting matters of fact. And this meeting is a matter of fact just as any other. Everyone is here physically. And I would agree that to be able to act, or be able to state our position in those terms is important. And to some extent, it would seem to me that it's a matter of fact that the council is confronted by a group of people who are as insistent on a 5-year contract as they are on a 3. And it would seem to me, to some extent, that people who are insistent on that are the ones that they depend upon to have the school continue to operate. That's you. It's each and every one of you. And if they disregard that, somehow or another, make a vote upon this, may or may not affect it. Council may not alter any of their matters of fact at all. On the other hand, your matter of fact, to some extent, are the ones that the school the one that continuously, or since the time that I've been here, that's been the concern. That was one of the people that at one time the president of the council asked about if I was supposed to be a 5-year contract. My reply was, you know very well that however long the contract Alvin will offer is worth it to the student. And I still stand in that position. I don't essentially think that it's a matter of fact that I'll continue for the same length of time that I've been previously. Previously, that's a matter of fact. From now on, it's a matter of projection.
Do you have questions on the report?
Yes, I would
Do they mean anything?
I'm not questioning, not
There is-
questioning anyone's sincerity at all. But I just think that some reports here are equally important.
Yes. They're a historical description of the events of the last few months. But the fact is the situation of the day, not what it was some weeks ago. Any questions on the reports? Do you have a question on the report? Yes. Yes, the question is, constitutionally, is the Council bound by any of the decisions or recommendations which we make today? And neither Edouard or I can answer that in two ways. Constitutionally, they are under no obligation to do anything that we may direct or request or recommend them to do. However, history has shown it to be very unwise to actually resist the legitimate and properly expressed views of the school. Mike?
Are the terms of the contract which are being offered to Alvin now known to the JAWG? If they are they consistent with the requirements or the views that the staff made known in their meetings, except for the 3-year term?
That is our understanding, yeah.
Sorry, have you seen the terms? I mean, have you actually seen them?
No, I haven't been through the entire contract, no. I know that the terms, the clauses in the contract on which JAWG was advised, on which JAWG was directed by staff and student communities to request changes and additions to the contract have all been incorporated in the proper and correct manner. And I know that Alvin has accepted all those terms apart from the 3- and 5-year term. So, as far as we know, yes.
Do you want to add to that answer at all? No. Any further questions? Further questions? Question?
What are the possible consequences of removing no confidence in the council?
That's not a question on the report. I'll take questions like that when the moment arrives. Any further questions on the reports?
Very small calculation made was that by putting up the fees, the money coming into the school will be increased approximately, guess, around £500,000. £500,000 with this 15% increase. That seems like a fairly substantial amount.
Yes, Charlotte can answer that.
I said before, I'm Charlotte Goodrill. I run the AA Accounts Department.
It's all your fault.
No, it isn't.
Although I have been around the AA in various capacities for quite a number of years, I'm going to let you laugh again by telling you that I've been running the AA Accounts Department for the last 2 years. That's in the context of what was said before about deficits in those years. Your question was, will you be getting a detailed breakdown of the AA's finances? And this is not, it's not an easy